For this lesson, we're going to talk about theater. In our modern world, live theater is not really as common as it was 100 years ago, 500 years ago, or even thousands of years ago, when the way that drama was presented was only in the live version. However, live theater continues to represent a very unique and powerful way to experience a story or a myth, which is a life lesson set forth in a theatrical production. When one experiences live theater, it is a unique event. It is all happening in real time. There is a level of listening and watching that is really unique to this art form. When we look at great plays of Shakespeare and other artists and writers from the past, they demand more of the listener, of the one viewing the plays, than is demanded when we are simply watching a movie. The origins of theater probably go back to since before time began, so to speak, when in the cold winter months traditional people would act out dramas around their campfire. But beginning with the Greeks, theater became more systematized, more formal, more organized, as the Greeks actually created religious rituals around theater. There are elements of drama that were put forth by Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, and that would be plot, which is a series of events that usually lead to some kind of a disaster or catharsis for the main character. And the character is really the development of the person, often in a form of an archetype or a traditional, like you could think of the hero, the anti-hero or villain, the protagonist who's just a small person who does great things, etc., etc. These archetypical characters are also seen in our movies of today. They're just elements of story in general. Now, the diction is the language, is how the words are spoken. And as I just said, that can sometimes challenge the listener to a drama to listen more deeply than they would if they were simply watching a movie. The thought is the underlying ideas. You could say the current of the drama. What does the author of the drama really want the viewer or listener to understand from it? And we have the spectacle, and this varies greatly with different styles of drama. Sometimes there's minimalist drama where there's very little in the way of set and costume, and some dramas are very lavish and are really all about that. And then we have music. In case of the Greek drama, the dialogue was often sung or chanted by a chorus, and the music was considered important emotional part of the play. Now here's one example of a Greek theater, and here's another one that has been reconstructed visually. So you can imagine thousands of people sitting to watch this play that unfolded in front of it. The chorus and the action would happen here. And sometimes the plays were part of rituals that went on for days. Each play could be hours long. From there, the modern drama has been pretty consistent throughout history, the European history, in a variety of forms. And we'll fast forward now to take a look at Shakespeare. There are no actual models of Shakespeare's theater, which was known as the Globe, but there are written descriptions, and so it's been rebuilt according to those descriptions. And here we have an image of the Globe Theater from London. In Shakespeare, I'll tell you my own experience. I went to Shakespeare festivals several times when I was quite young. And at first I would be a little skeptical. You know, like I just couldn't understand it, and it was as if they were speaking a different language. But what happens when one listens to Shakespeare over a period of time is that the beauty of the language reveals itself, and the rhythm of his words and how they flow together, and his great humor start to expose themselves. So even as a young child of 10 or 12 at a Shakespeare festival, by the time I got well into my first play, I was able to understand the language, and then I was able to get into the intricacies of the subtleties that Shakespeare often has in his plays, along with his development of archetypes. Here's an exterior of the Globe Theater in London as it's been reconstructed. Now, speaking of archetypes, an archetype is a pattern or something that is basic to the human condition that we will recognize. Even if we don't recognize it consciously, we'll still recognize it sort of at the base of our brain, so to speak. Oh, let's see, the evil landlord. Well, that's an example of an archetype. It's also kind of a caricature and a generalization, but that's the nature of archetypes. One very well-known archetype that we see in fiction, in drama, and in movies is the quest. So look at The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy went on a quest, and she discovered that at the end there's no place like home. In The Hobbit, there were great quests. In Harry Potter, this is something that's repeated throughout history. Even in traditional cultures, such as the Northwest Native American cultures, theater played an important role. In the Northwest Coast Native American cultures, the way that the weather works is that from late spring on through early fall, there's much abundance because it rains so much. The crops are plentiful, the food is plentiful, and so they gather their food. They fish for the salmon and dry the salmon and dry berries and etc., etc. But then in the winter months, when the sun only shines for a short period of the day and it rains really for weeks at a time, the traditional Native Americans would gather in their longhouses and present these dramatic mythological plays. They have creation myths. They have other myths that teach moral lessons to the people. And that's what these masks were traditionally used for. Sometimes these masks are on display in museums, but when we consider them in the context with which they were used, it really puts a whole different spin on these masks. The people who danced and who performed trained very intensely to have the honor of performing these dramas for the rest of the people. And they were part of elaborate rituals called potlatches, where the community would give away. There was sort of a competition to see who could give away more. And they would all gather and have great feasts, and these dramas would be considered as part of the ritual. In our modern times, the theater continues to have great importance. I hope that all of you have the opportunity to be a part of a live theater event as an audience member or even taking part in a theatrical production. What we're looking at here is a still from the Broadway play Hamilton. This musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda goes through the life of Alexander Hamilton, and it presents this historical tale using hip-hop and music in a way that really puts it into perspective for modern times. Theater can take all sorts of forms, taking on symbolism, causing us to think deeply about our lives. And one of the powers of live theater is that it is happening in real time. We are all there together experiencing the drama as it unfolds on the stage, and it will never be again in that same form. And as I've said before, I invite you all to look for the opportunity to experience live drama, because it is really unlike any other art form. At the end of the chapter, they go a little bit into experimental theater, and we're seeing a still from an experimental theater production here, which looks like it's sort of celebrating the absurd. a lot of times in theater, the idea is to shock us out of our usual way of looking at things. The writer Samuel Beckett, the playwright Samuel Beckett, did this really masterfully, although some of his work is very challenging. There's a couple of videos that explore that in this week's lesson. And finally, theater can take many forms, from community theater to shows in Branson to a play put on by kids in the living room. And all of it touches something within our nature that goes back to the very origin of humanity. So if any of you feel like you can't relate to theater, or Shakespeare is so in the past, or you'd rather watch a movie, that's all understandable. And at the same time, I encourage you to dig deep and to look for that maybe ancient memory within yourself where you can tap into the real magic of theater and drama as it unfolds in our lives, as we experience the myths and the archetypes that are simply a part of our shared humanity. So, thanks for listening.